On Capitol Hill, a bold and controversial idea is gaining traction, sparking heated debates among lawmakers, policy experts, and the public alike. The halls of Congress are abuzz with urgent discussions, as the nation grapples with a crisis that has defied solutions for decades. The proposal at the center of this storm? Using U.S. military force against drug cartels operating inside Mexico, a move that would mark a dramatic escalation in America's response to the drug crisis. Some politicians are now pushing to officially designate Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. This legal shift would open the door to military strikes and covert operations, options that were once considered unthinkable in the context of U.S.-Mexico relations. The debate is fierce, with supporters insisting that extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. Supporters of military intervention argue that years of failed diplomacy, porous borders, and overwhelmed law enforcement have left the U.S. vulnerable. They point to the relentless flow of fentanyl and other deadly drugs, which have fueled a public health emergency and claimed tens of thousands of American lives. For them, a more aggressive response is not just justified, it's necessary to protect communities and families from further devastation. This marks a dramatic shift in strategy, from partnership and cooperation with Mexico to a posture of confrontation. By treating cartels as military threats rather than criminal organizations, the U.S. would be fundamentally changing the rules of engagement, raising questions about sovereignty, international law, and the future of cross-border relations. The rhetoric from some leaders is clear and uncompromising. If Mexico cannot or will not control the cartels, then the United States must act unilaterally to defend its citizens. This tough-on-crime stance is resonating with a public frustrated by the ongoing drug epidemic and eager for decisive action. The narrative being crafted frames the drug crisis as an external attack on the United States, likening cartel operations to acts of war. This framing is used to justify the use of military precision, advanced technology, and overwhelming force, tools typically reserved for foreign adversaries, not criminal networks. Political pressure is mounting on all sides, fueled by the staggering toll of overdose deaths, the strain on hospitals and first responders, and a growing sense of urgency among voters. Lawmakers are fielding tough questions from constituents and the media, as the demand for a solution grows louder with each passing day. For some advocates, military intervention offers the promise of striking directly at the source, dismantling the networks that manufacture and traffic deadly drugs before they ever reach American soil. They envision swift, targeted operations that could cripple cartel leadership and disrupt supply chains. But critics warn that this approach oversimplifies a deeply complex problem. The roots of the drug trade run deep, intertwined with poverty, corruption, and weak institutions. Military action risks turning a neighboring country into a battlefield, endangering civilians, straining diplomatic ties, and potentially fueling even greater instability in the region. The consequences of such a move could be far-reaching, opening a dangerous new chapter in the already troubled history of the war on drugs. As the debate intensifies, the nation stands at a crossroads, facing hard questions about security, sovereignty, and the true cost of decisive action. Deploying U.S. troops in Mexico faces enormous legal and diplomatic barriers. International law forbids unilateral military action on another nation's soil without consent, making such a strike a violation of Mexican sovereignty. The U.S. president's war powers are limited. Launching an attack would likely require explicit congressional approval. Even labeling cartels as terrorist groups doesn't erase these legal guardrails. Violating international law would isolate the U.S. and erode its global standing. Ignoring domestic legal processes could trigger a constitutional crisis. These hurdles exist to prevent reckless military adventures and protect both democracy and global stability. Throughout history, the use of military force to combat drug trafficking has rarely led to lasting change. While such operations may disrupt cartel activities in the short term, the underlying networks often remain intact, ready to regroup and resume business as usual. Unlike traditional armies, drug cartels are highly adaptable. They operate in decentralized cells, making it difficult to dismantle them completely. When faced with pressure, they simply shift routes, change tactics, and recruit new members, ensuring their survival. Taking down a drug lab or arresting a high-profile leader may make headlines, but these victories are often fleeting. New leaders quickly rise to fill the void, and production resumes elsewhere, sometimes even increasing as rival groups compete for control. The resilience of the drug trade is deeply rooted in persistent demand within the United States and the vast, complex global supply chains that support it. As long as there is a market, traffickers will find ways to meet it, adapting to new obstacles with remarkable speed. Relying on military intervention in Mexico overlooks the international scope of the drug trade and fails to address the social and economic reasons people turn to drugs in the first place. It risks alienating local communities and escalating violence without solving the core issues. Experts from around the world agree, addressing drug abuse as a public health issue by expanding access to treatment and prevention programs is far more effective than relying on force. Reducing demand is key to breaking the cycle. Despite decades of aggressive enforcement and billions spent on the so-called war on drugs, illicit substances remain widely available and overdose rates continue to climb. The evidence suggests that force alone cannot solve this complex problem. Escalating failed strategies with increased military involvement risks repeating the mistakes of the past. Only this time the consequences could be even more severe, both for Mexico and the United States. It's time to rethink our approach and focus on solutions that address the root causes of the crisis. A U.S. military strike in Mexico would devastate a vital partnership. Mexico is a key economic and strategic ally. Sharing deep trade and security ties with the U.S. unilateral action would be seen as a betrayal, likely ending cooperation on border security and intelligence. This would make it harder to combat cartels and manage migration, leaving the U.S. less secure. The fallout could disrupt economies, supply chains, and the lives of millions on both sides of the border. Trust shattered by military action could take decades to rebuild. The U.S.-Mexico relationship is a delicate ecosystem. Military intervention would destabilize it. True progress requires partnership, not conflict. Military strikes against cartels would almost certainly provoke violent retaliation. The cartels, known for their brutal tactics and deep-rooted influence, would not simply stand by in the face of such aggression. Instead, they would likely respond with force, seeking to send a clear message that any attack on them comes with a heavy price. These groups are heavily armed and ruthless, equipped with military-grade weapons and advanced technology. Their resources rival those of small armies, and they have the means to target Americans not only in Mexico, but potentially on U.S. soil as well. Cartels have demonstrated time and again their willingness to use violence to protect their interests, and their reach extends far beyond the border. Millions of Americans travel, work, or live in Mexico each year, making them vulnerable to becoming targets in the event of retaliation. Tourists, expatriates, and business travelers could all find themselves at risk, as cartels may seek to exploit any opportunity to strike back at perceived enemies. Cartels could escalate violence along the border, launching attacks on towns and infrastructure, or use their established U.S. networks for retribution. This could mean kidnappings, bombings, or targeted assassinations, not just in Mexico, but in American cities as well. What is now a law enforcement issue could quickly spiral into a wider, deadlier conflict, drawing in military resources and putting entire communities at risk. The line between crime and war could blur, making it harder to protect civilians and maintain order. Experts warn that such a move would expose Americans to greater danger, not less. The threat of retaliation could destabilize both sides of the border, overwhelming local authorities and straining international relations. Direct attacks could trigger a cycle of violence and instability, with each side escalating in response to the other. Innocent people could be caught in the crossfire and the region could face years of turmoil. Policymakers must carefully weigh the real risk of turning drug trafficking into open warfare. The consequences of military action could be far-reaching, making the situation more dangerous for everyone involved. Blaming Mexican cartels alone ignores the roots of America's drug crisis. The opioid epidemic began with aggressive marketing by U.S. pharmaceutical companies, creating widespread addiction. Social and economic factors, poverty, despair, lack of health care, fuel demand for illicit drugs. Unless these root causes are addressed, addiction and demand will persist. Focusing solely on foreign enemies distracts from holding American institutions accountable. A real solution must tackle both international supply and domestic demand. Declaring war on cartels is a simplistic answer to a complex, homegrown problem. Decades of supply-side crackdowns have failed to stop the flow of drugs into the U.S. Billions spent on arrests, crop eradication, and border seizures have not reduced drug potency or overdose deaths. The kingpin strategy of targeting cartel leaders often leads to more violence in splintered groups. History shows that these tactics only shift trafficking routes and make the drug trade harder to control. The continued rise in overdose deaths signals the need for a new approach. Doubling down on failed strategies, even with military force, won't work. Past interventions have produced only temporary, superficial victories. Military strikes are just the most extreme version of a failed policy. A smarter approach prioritizes public health and international cooperation over military action. Expanding access to addiction treatment, mental health care, and harm reduction saves lives and restores communities. Working with Mexico as a partner, sharing intelligence, strengthening institutions, and fighting corruption builds trust and effectiveness. Supporting civil society and investing in communities addresses the root causes of addiction. Holding U.S. pharmaceutical companies accountable is essential for real change. A comprehensive strategy tackles demand, supply, and systemic failures together. This path is harder, requiring patience and investment, but it offers real hope for progress. Only by rejecting simplistic solutions can we end this devastating crisis. The push for military action reflects frustration, but history warns against it. A unilateral strike would violate law, destroy U.S.-Mexico relations, and invite cartel retaliation. The drug crisis is rooted in addiction, despair, and corporate greed, not just foreign cartels. Real solutions require looking inward, investing in public health, and holding institutions accountable. Partnership with Mexico and a focus on treatment offer the only realistic hope for change. We face a choice: escalate a failed war, or build a future on cooperation and healing. The path forward demands wisdom, patience, and a commitment to real solutions, not more conflict.